Welcome to our lesson on recipe management in Wise SCADA. We add a new recipe from the recipes section, and let's add 2 tags as well. We select our tags here. I selected tags of different types. I will explain the columns here to you later. I'm going to the screen design right away and adding the recipe manager object to the screen. I am starting the runtime. Runtime is open. We see the recipe we created here. Currently, there are no records available under this title. We can change recipe values by clicking here. I change them to true and 50. And I am creating the first recipe with the Save As button. I am changing the values again. This time I made it false and 60. I saved one more recipe. When I change the saved recipes from here, you can see that the values in the recipe value column change as well. In the actual value column, we see the current value of this tag. As I change the tag's value from above, you can see it changing in the actual value section as well. Now, when I select recipe 2 and load it with load, the false value will be overwritten on the currently true value. Likewise, the value 60 will be overwritten on 0. If this were a tag communicating with a PLC, these values would go to the PLC. I am selecting the other recipe. I am loading different values. As you can see, we can observe the tag values changing both in this actual value column and here. Before saving a recipe, the recipe value column can be changed by the operator, or values inside the PLC. For example, let me write 75 here, values inside the PLC are retrieved into the recipe value column with the update button. If you wish, you can save it as a new recipe. Or we update the values of the currently selected recipe here by clicking Save. Now when we select recipe 1 again, we see these last saved values. We covered the topics of loading recipes to the PLC, saving, and retrieving current values back to the recipe. It's already a very simple topic. Now let's examine it in a bit more detail. In the description column, instead of seeing the name of this tag, you can write broader descriptions for operators to see more meaningful expressions. You can ensure operators enter data in light of this information by adding longer information to the comments section. In the minimum and maximum columns, you can impose limits on the smallest and largest values of this tag that can be saved to the recipe. For example, I set limits as 10 and 100. We can change the default value. There is nothing else to explain in this section. Now let's go to the Screen Designer section and continue with the recipe object. You see the texts on this object are currently in English. You can change these texts by clicking on the Advanced section. For example, let's change the text on the Load button. We find the text property. Here we can write and add texts in different languages or in the language we use. Likewise, we can change the icons of these buttons. Or we can make the buttons completely invisible to prevent operators from using them. For instance, let's make the new button here, the Add New Recipe button, invisible. When I set the visible property to false, that button will no longer appear. In the first section of settings, you can impose restrictions based on user authority level. For example, the delete password parameter here is currently 0, meaning the lowest level user can delete the recipe. When I enter 10 here, the user level must be 10 or above to be able to delete the recipe. User definitions are made in the Setup section. User authority level can be defined here. If we say 10 for this user, they can delete this recipe. When we say 9 for this user, they will not be able to delete the recipe. Let's return to the screen section. Columns on the table might be too many and unnecessary. You can change them. You can see all columns here under the Result Grid Columns heading. We can change the headers of the columns from here. Or we can make some columns invisible. For example, let's make type invisible. Let's set the visible property to false. The type column is no longer visible. And I set the header of our first column as number 1, 2, 3. Finally, let's create a second category. The structure we created here is actually the template of the recipe. We determine its structure, select tags, and enter descriptions. We will create and save recipes related to this title in Runtime. Let's add a second category. Let's even change its name from here. I named it Machine 1. Imagine we have many machines. We created a recipe category for each machine. And we can create recipes for each machine by selecting different tags in each category. In our first recipe, we had selected tag and tag 3. In this recipe, we selected tag 1 and tag 4. Now let's run the runtime. We can now control both categories via the Recipe Manager object. We have 2 recipes inside the recipe category. We don't have any recipes in the Machine 1 category yet. We can enter values from here and record our first recipe with save. We can select category and recipe via name, and use load or update buttons. We can switch to a different category, select a recipe from there too, and perform load and update operations again. Thank you for watching our lesson.